All right. Well, friends, everyone, meet Boomer. This is Boomer.
Hello,
Um,
everybody.
we first talked. It was about a month ago, right?
Hmm.
I always try to remember the dates. But anyways, so I'm talking with Boomer today. He kind of has this feat in a bunch of different things. But I know that you own your own company, and then you also have helped create a couple companies. And then you worked in finance for a long time, and now you're working more in health and optimization. But you're, like we were just talking about, right? Your bread and butter is really the in between. What kind of comes in between the whole finance and the health industry. So my basic question I like to ask is the what you do and why you do it. And that's what I'm going to lead off with. So what do you do,
Okay.
Boomer? Do it.
Okay. Because the first part, I could probably take a whole hour trying to explain what I do to people. Uh, so, what do I do? Um, you have a multitude of roles, right? We all have a multitude of roles in life. That can be anything from something as simple as daughter, son, in my case, to a husband, to, you know, like investor, aspiring art critic, those kind of things, right? But let's go through the practicals because I think what do I do is that I am very, very interested and I'm a very curious person. And so that curiosity has led me down a number of fields. Those fields can be called roles, right? And so uh, when somebody asks you that question in a cocktail party, everybody answers with what your occupation is. And so why don't we try to take a different spin and just say, like, I'm a curious person. And so that curiosity has led me a number of places in life. Currently, what that means is that I serve as the chief executive officer of a company called Smarter, Not Harder, Inc. We make products called Troscriptions. And what we do at Troscriptions is produce was really receptor equivalent formulations to tackle some of the United States' largest health problems. And that can include areas like attention. I mean, this is going to get shared hopefully in long format, but the most popular videos of the world these days seem to be on TikTok. And what is that? Less than a minute in terms of attention span, right? And the amount of time people spend on TikTok is somewhat concerning. No judgments, but it's interesting to see how our attention span has just waned in many ways.
Oh
We
my
also
gosh, yeah.
produce formulations for stress. And so if you look at one of the larger addictions in the United States, it's to stress reducing medications or benzodiazepines. And so we took a crack at making a stress formulation, which is, in my opinion, very, very good at replacing those kinds of stress, resilience, dependence, really helping to augment the resilience that we're trying to build to withstand the stresses of everyday life. And so Troscriptions does take up a large portion of my time, but Troscriptions was actually created because of a nonprofit, which is another one of my roles. And so Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. I know you spoke to Dr. Ed. He's gone through our curriculum, but what we do is we, in simplistic terms, help doctors and practitioners learn how to optimize for health rather than treat disease. Now, when I say that, there's somewhat of a pause in most people's brain, right? There's like, wait, what do you mean? So most medical practitioners, at least the ones that I spoke to, got into becoming a medical practitioner because they wanted to help people be healthy. And what they ultimately ended up doing was something vastly different. And in medical school, a lot of these practitioners are not taught very much about sleep. They're certainly not taught much about chronobiology, not taught a lot about mitochondrial health, and they're not typically taught about evolutionary biology. And so what Dr. Ted, my mentor, very close friend, did was created a curriculum to help doctors and practitioners learn how to nutrient balance and hormone balance appropriately. And in the best of clients, the most diligent, so maybe you, Madison, but the most diligent of clients probably takes about 6 to 9 months to balance their nutrients. But if somebody is coming to you with a issue with pain, sleep, stress, and they say, and you basically tell them it's going to take 6 to 9 months, well, they're going to probably tell you to go home. And so what we did with Troscriptions was really seek to fill that gap. And so most of my time is spent working with those projects right now. I also have my own health optimization practice where I work with entrepreneurs to really optimize their health. The reason why I do that is frankly because I am one and I know what that lifestyle is like. And so I do that. I also used to do competition barbecue when I was younger, but that is probably not
just like my favorite thing ever.
it's probably not germane to this conversation. So, and I have a podcast too. And, you know, what do I do? And then why do I do it? You and I were chatting on about this a month ago, and it was the first time where I really connected the thread, because if you look at my two prime interests are finance and health. I grew up and I was one of these freaks who at the age of 12 knew what I wanted to do for a living, and started trading my first stocks when I was 12 years old, right? And, you know, it's funny because at 12 years old, you think you can do everything until you trade a stock and it goes down 50% and you don't know why. And I'm so grateful to the fact that I lost money on that first bet, because if you lose money on your first bet, the natural predisposition for me is to delve into why. Right. And so it allowed me to go on this learning exercise, which eventually caused me to go into investment banking for 10 years. I moved from New York to Singapore. I lived in Singapore for 6 years, and now I've lived in Amsterdam for 6 years. But I really, really love finance, and I still do. But at some point, I got very, very curious about health. Perhaps it was the fact that my mom was a yoga teacher. So just kind of going to this very interesting dynamic of when I grew up. My dad was in finance, but he did this stuff that nobody likes to do, operations. My mom was a yoga teacher. And so I had this interesting East meets West dynamic at home. And my mom was like this early, you know, the Beatles were very early into meditation, right?
Yeah.
Before it became popular. The Beatles were very early into LSD. But my mom was very early into meditation in the 90s before it became like exploded. And so I would go home and see my mom not only doing yoga poses, but she would be staring at the wall for 20 minutes. And I'd be like, okay, what the hell is that? But I also was taught very early the importance of things like breath work in terms of changing your state. And that carried through with me into finance. Now, when I was in finance, it became much more about the aesthetics of it all. So working out for looking good, working out for, you know, blowing off stress a little bit, but I was doing too much, too hard, too soon, much like my finance career. And I was looking at, you know, how to become the best CrossFit athlete possible. I'm sure you've had some exposure to CrossFit, but I was
That's
pushing.
what I coach.
There you go. And, you know, there's probably a great way to coach it. But you also,
there's much better ways to coach it than what some coaches will coach.
Exactly. And I to be fair, I had really good coaches. It's just when you're doing a sport like CrossFit, and then you have a lifestyle like banking, where I was on a plane to a different time zone every single week. You know, once a month I was in Europe from Singapore. That's a 6-hour time difference. And about 6 times a year I was in the United States. So my body could not handle the stress of a lot of CrossFit workouts. But I was also trying to be number one on the board because, you know, that's what people with high testosterone do, right? And so you kind of had this interesting, these two interests, health, finance. And it all came to a head when I was 30 years old. In fact, I had a cardiac issue that I had a chance of a heart attack at some point in my life. And it was pretty evident that that was coming because I had tests that would tell me that. And so I had done all this work on my health, but clearly I got something wrong. And so what do? I left my job to kind of fix my heart and decided to move to Amsterdam with my now wife, and became very, very interested in the health component of this, but also particularly the biochemistry and really understanding the data in health. So whether it's quantified self, whether it's genetics or any of the omics sciences, I got really, really into those because, you know, I was a finance nerd. So like data gave me an orgasm in many ways. And so like, why not have orgasms from health too? And so it became just more, rather than an interest, it became a job when other people asked me to help them when they saw what I had done for my own health. But the common thread between all of this is that curiosity, and particularly the curiosity in human behavior. So if you look at why Madison does something, or why an individual does something. And let me give an example that's probably a little bit more concrete for people. I have a very good friend, and he's younger than me, but he gets a lot of his joy, his motivation to do things from other people. So he's constantly setting up meetings with other people just to get more joy. And he's actually, from a biochemical standpoint, very low in dopamine. Right. This is also why he loves to do exercise, and he just has his identity in exercise.
Oh my gosh,
and
are you talking about me?
No, absolutely not.
It just sounds like it. Keep going.
But it's just interesting, because when you understand the biochemistry and you dig into it a little bit, and you've done enough tests on yourself and other people, you can start to see when a person looks at you, you can start to, and they interact with you, you can start to point to the fact that, oh, there might be a dopamine deficiency in there, or and maybe it's just the fact that they're young and have too much testosterone and they don't know what to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this common thread of human behavior. Now, on an individual level, you can notice that a lot through a knowledge of biochemistry. On a societal level, one of the best ways to view that is actually through financial markets. And so if you think about, the way you can, like, what a financial market or a stock price actually reflects is inherently, now there's a nuance to this, right? But like over a long time, it's basically demand for a particular product, right? And when you see that a particular stock price is rising, it's reflective of underlying people's interest in that product, that industry, etc. And so what you're actually observing in finance and financial markets is, at a macro level, how people are behaving. And to me, that is just the common thread through everything that I've done in life. And in fact, there's a whole section of finance called behavioral finance, which is basically observing how investors behave when it comes to the financial markets. But it's been a fascinating journey. And, up until recently, I was kind of like, oh, maybe I just do this because it's ADHD and it's interesting to me. But there is that curiosity that flows. But that curiosity is mainly, that main common thread is human behavior. So what makes a human behave the way it does? What makes the human decide on certain particular things? And so you get into things like social cultural programming, as well as our bioevolutionary programs. And then what does that mean for society? And that's ultimately the easiest reflection to observe on a day-to-day basis is financial markets.
I love that.
What's that?
That was the reason in the conversation, the first one we had, I was like, all right, definitely need to talk to this guy again, because you made the connection between finances and health so like flawless. And I think that especially people that don't have a lot of interest in finance, me, it creates a connection of some type of understanding for us to, the way that you can connect those two sides. And gives more of an interest to people like me who tend to have less interest in finances. Really quick, can you turn your video off and then turn it back on?
Sure.
Every once in a while, mine likes to freeze your face. And when I play the video, I can still see you moving. But there you go. Cool. It happened a couple times with Ed yesterday too, where it just like freezes your video. So anyways, so first and foremost, you're really fun to talk to in a sense because you have so many different sides to you. So it's not like there's one path and this.
My backside's my best side, I've been told.
I mean, there you go.
Lots of squats. There you go.
Yeah. So then arguably you could have, an infinite amount of sides depending on the way that we look from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you really do. I feel like you do have an infinite amount of sides to you depending on how you look at it. So let's kind of, because I know it's like part of me really wants to go down the financial route because
go down whatever route you want to go down.
I know but I also I think I kind of want to go down the route of the connection between the two a little bit more and dig a little deeper on that. Sure. Because the way that you explain it obviously is Awesome. But was there like a time in your life when you really just went where it made sense to you, right? Where the financial and the health side, when it connected for you and you just had that connection of, oh my gosh, this makes sense. And now that I can actually track the usage of this with clients and what people do because of the behavior that's going on right now in the economy.
It's funny you mentioned this, Madison, because at different points it clicks and at different points it becomes simpler. And so there's obviously like an initial click, where that initial click was like when I had the heart issue, and it was, okay, I'm going to leave my quite successful career in investment banking. I'm going to go start something completely uncertain, and it's going to be in this health field because that's my interest. And there's a click where it was like, okay, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. And I don't know very many people who've done it, sort of straddled that line between health and finance. And so you kind of go through it and you're like, okay, I'll invest in a couple of companies in this health space. I'll try and help them grow. Then I'll start my own, and you kind of go a little bit back, and it's still a little bit murky, right? And then, as I began working more and more with clients, and keep in mind, a lot of my initial health experience was self-taught, right? Like I went because I was not happy with the answers I was getting, particularly with the cardiovascular doctors I was talking to, who all wanted me to go on something called a statin, which lowers your cholesterol. But I didn't have high cholesterol. So it didn't make sense to me that they would make me go on these substances, right? And again, that was my own interpretation of it. And so I went and then started looking at the data. And the data initially was genetics, and then it was metabolomics. And so genetics fundamentally is the blueprint of, take for example, you, Madison, like when you are conceived, and so your parents copulate and make a baby, right? At that point, you have a blueprint of what is Madison. And there's different ways that that code gets read and it produces you. And then that code, as you go out into the world, can get altered by your environment. And this is where epigenetics comes in. And this is, a lot of people have a huge hard-on for epigenetics and genetics, and we're very genetic centric. But the fact is that the genes ultimately get altered by your environment. That's epigenetics. You can go down to transcriptomics, then you can go down to a whole bunch of other stuff, eventually get to the metabolome. And the metabolome tells you where you are, and that's a cellular level health thing. And you probably talked a little bit about this with Ed.
Yeah.
And so when you start really studying the metabolome, and particularly looking at things like neurotransmitters or heavy metal toxicities, and you start then interacting with people as you do with a client, you start to notice these correlations. And so I deal almost exclusively in that realm of my life with entrepreneurs. And so a lot of them have incredible stressful lives. They're able to do a lot, but they have incredibly stressful lives. And you start to notice these certain behaviors. And, that behavior itself, then eventually, as you do more and more of these tests, you start to actually be able to see it in people before you read their tests, right? Like if they're too high stress and they're too reactive, perhaps there's an issue with serotonin, or perhaps it's a B vitamin deficiency, probably both. And you can start to surmise, what their sort of underlying health concerns are before you meet them. Or if they have impulse control issues, or like the person I mentioned earlier, if they need to work out excessively because it gives them dopamine, and that is their sort of reward mechanism, if you will. Those are very, very easily observable. And then you kind of, as I'm going through and working with more and more clients, I'm also at the same time looking at how to build a business. And then you can kind of extrapolate it, because I always pay attention to financial markets. And then at one point, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I've seen now enough people with self-diagnosed ADHD or some sort of focus issue. And then, you look at the headlines and you see TikTok, which is owned by a company called ByteDance in China, gets a valuation in the 40s of billions of dollars or something like this, right? And you're like, okay, So at a societal level, we have an attention span issue, right? Because
Yeah.
how many, and you look at what's in particularly interesting about ByteDance and social media is that they track the number of minutes and hours the average user spend per day on these different services. And so I grew up back in the days of like MySpace, right? And so I never had a
Same.
MySpace account. I don't really know like
Oh, you
what
didn't
you
have your
did on.
top 5 friends?
No, I didn't. I was never a MySpacer or whatever they called them. And really, I was on Facebook. I think University of Minnesota, which is where I went to school, was one of the first universities that Facebook rolled out to. And I was on Facebook pretty early. And so you begin, I've seen the evolution of Facebook from just a place where like you add friends to when you started adding status and then they introduce ads and all that stuff. But you can also at a macro level see, okay, people spend a certain number of minutes and hours on Facebook a day, and then Instagram is higher. And then on top of that, you have now ByteDance, which has a $40 billion valuation or whatever the number is. And you have people spending hours a day on TikTok. And that, to me, you can observe that common thread. And I think that's really where it clicked was like, okay, I have all of these clients who are incredibly successful people, but they have issues with dopamine, being able to focus. They have issues with just general neurochemistry. And then I see it reflected on the world stage with something like ByteDance. And that was really sort of the moment when I was like, okay, there's something here. There's a common thread here that I have found interest in. And it's the behavior of humans, right? And there is always clues littered throughout this, right? Like my entire life, I've been very, very interested in culture. Like I've traveled to now 66 countries.
Oh gosh.
Most of that, by the way, was condensed into like a 5-year period. But I've been to 66 countries. I just got back from South Africa. And the curiosity of culture is always there. But fundamentally, what is culture a reflection of? It's a reflection of human behavior. And so it's just, to me, it's the most fascinating topic. And, to be able to sit in this space, which I really didn't know if I was going to find an occupation here, but you sit in this space of being this sort of human behavior, having this human behavior interest and being able to straddle it with the individual and the society on either side is just a fascinating place to be.
And that's okay. So, well, first and foremost, how old are you?
Oh, I'm not supposed to ask a person their age. No, I'm 36.
Well,
no, I'm good.
I'm
okay.
I'm a female. I can ask whoever I want.
Yeah, you can ask whatever you want. And you should. I am 36 years old, but biologically I'm 21. So
Okay.
If you look at my epigenetics tests, I am ready to start drinking alcohol, but I'm 36 and I gave up drinking alcohol.
Okay, so well, that's the whole conversation in of itself.
Yeah.
But have you listened to Dr. Dispenza as much, very much, or?
I'm familiar with his work, and so I know Dr. Joe's stuff very well.
Yeah, because that was when you're talking about like genetics and how like genetics make up who you are, and because his I don't even know what necessarily to call it, whether it's a belief or what he does or whatever, but he basically believes that you can change your genetics, like you have the ability to influence your genetics.
You're absolutely correct.
Really,
and if you look at it from, let's talk about sort of the scientific side of this, because there's also the stuff that has still to be proven in a lab, right? And so from a genetic standpoint, or from an epigenetic standpoint, so that's sort of the environmental influence on your genes, right? Exercise itself has the effect of essentially changing the expression of something like 8,000 genes. Now, we don't know exactly what happens there. And so people look at that number and they say, oh, yeah, that's great. Well, obviously, one of them is around genetics for obesity, right? But we don't know exactly what's happening there. But we do know it changes the expression so that epigenetically it changes your genetics to actually.
So what does it mean by the expression? Like when you, because I've heard that said a lot when people say it changes the gene expression. Is that just like how it shows up in you?
Sure. So you have it right in terms of how it shows up in you. But let's talk about epigenetic expression. So when your gene decides to print a protein, so you print a protein, the protein, or you print an amino acid sequence, and that eventually becomes a protein, eventually kind of downstream becomes some sort of aspect of you, right? And so when you decide when that decision is created, you can, I'm simplifying this, so for whoever's listening, it's, I'm not going to get super technical here, but what happens is that with epigenetics, you can silence it, meaning that it chooses not to print, or you can enhance it, meaning you give it a chance to print. And so in the case of exercise, there is some alterations in expression. We don't know if it's silencing or if it's enhancing entirely yet, but there are some changes in expression there. You look at, just one of the best ways to actually look at this is identical twins that grow up in different environments. And we can actually show that the environment influences their genes, right? Because they end up looking not so similar. One may be obese, one may be thin, etc. And so expression's a whole subject for another podcast, but it's a fascinating field. And so people like Dispenza and Bruce Lipton are saying, like, your thoughts could change your genes. Now, harder to prove, and to my knowledge, it hasn't been necessarily proved yet, but let's take something sort of tangential, right? Meditation. Meditation heavily influences the expression of certain pro-inflammatory cytokines. So a pro-inflammatory cytokine is triggered by a gene, right? And so a gene prints, and then that eventually becomes pro-inflammatory cytokine, creates inflammation. So meditation can actually silence some of those pro-inflammatory cytokines. There you go. And is meditation thinking? Well, in traditional Buddhist sense, it's non-thinking, but it's certainly something that is interesting to observe. Now, again, it's still harder to prove that your thoughts change your genes, or even something like there's that book, The Secret, right? Where like your thoughts create something. Again, I have to like, I do believe there's something there to look into. And I'm a curious person, as we talked about for the first 20 minutes here, and so I want to look into that, but I have to also default to what modern science tells me.
And I think, well, anything that has to deal with, because again, the argument here is that Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza have been able to, in a sense, prove scientifically that these things do happen. But also, I think you need it on a wider scale for people to really accept it as science. Like, if one or two people say it, and one or two people have been able to do it and been able to prove that they can do it, like, where is the real proof for it? So I can understand
now you're
both sides.
into like my favorite topic ever. So quantified self is really how I got into this whole space, right? And so I mentioned earlier and talked a little bit about my mom. Hi, Mom. But like, she'll probably listen to this. But that was sort of my interesting foray into N of one. And so N of one really began for me, N of one experimentation. So I am doing something, noting down the experimental results. I take my own risk, kind of thing. N of one experimentation began for me in college when I had my first calculus exam. And I was so stressed out that I couldn't really think, and I thought I was going to fail the exam. I called my mom, like any good stressed out boy, and said, Mom, what do I do? And my mom told me to breathe deeply 3 times through my mouth, through my nose, out through my mouth. And it was just sort of like what the yogis would call Ujjayi breathing, right?
Hey, perfect yoga mom. I love it.
Exactly. She was fantastic. She still is. And she's always there to answer that call. And so, you do that, and then immediately, like, my mind resets, and I'm like, oh, wow, this breathing thing, it works. And so, that was the initial foray into N of one. And N of one eventually evolved into an interest in this field called Quantified Self. And there's a whole thing called the Quantified Self Institute, ran by my good friend Gary Wolf. And I participated in those forums from like the age of 21 until today, really. And what we had in those forums were people doing really esoteric stuff. And you now have this in Discord channels, and you have it all over the place, but really just doing esoteric stuff, taking a note as to what the effect of this was on them, and then reporting it into this form. And so for me, I got into that because I wanted to sleep less, I wanted to work more, and I wanted to look good naked. It's selfish, right? And so, I was 21, and these N of 1 experiments are really, really important for generating ideas. And they helped people like me not only navigate that whole 3 problem set that I just gave you, although I did find out later that sleep is important.
Yeah.
But they also help people source ideas who have run into a system that can no longer help them. And so when it came to my cardiovascular issue, a lot of my inspiration for getting out of that was getting more into the quantified self stuff. And so whether it's Joe Dispenza or Bruce Lipton or whoever, even if they can produce an N of 9 and N of 30, N of 30 starts to get statistically significant in certain cases, but they help push science forward. And they help push ideas. And so I participated in the largest, what was called, I think they had a term for it, but it was the largest N of 1 experiment on cholesterol testing ever done. And so we would all take different parameters for cholesterol. We would do a cholesterol test sometimes multiple times a day, and we would do different experiments, and then we would self-report. And this all became part of a paper published by the Quantified Self Institute. And what I found interesting about that I was not told about by any sort of person in this field, was that you could test all of these depending on the time of day you test cholesterol, your cholesterol markers would be off significantly. And so everybody in that group crossed a risk category depending on the time of day that they tested their cholesterol. So it didn't matter if you thought you were the healthiest person in the world, but at some time during the day, if you test your cholesterol at 4 p.m. and you just had a meal, you may actually cross a risk threshold, which may actually qualify you to be prescribed something that you're supposed to take the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's useful information, right? And so I still spend a lot of time in the Discord forums, in these sort of esoteric chat rooms talking about random stuff. It's nerdy, but I love it.
So that's like, I know the same is for glucose, right? So people that have different glucose levels, it depends on when you take it, and then if you've eaten a meal, and how much you. So I think that's something that. Do they tell you? Because I know that with some of the tests, they tell you to fast before you go in. Do they do that with the cholesterol test?
It's been a while since look, I always do my own. I do my own testing now. For the most part, I have a doctor. I work with an incredible team of doctors, right? And so I have people that can look at my stuff all the time. But I generally do fasting cholesterol. And again, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. So please talk to your doctor before doing this. But, in speaking of blood glucose, you will notice a significant difference from when you wake up to even 2 hours after you wake up. And so just being very, very clear with whoever you're working with as to what that time of day is incredibly important, because otherwise your data is going to get all kinds of fucked up.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part about any kind of testing. I mean, that's, that was the whole argument with blood pressure testing, is people have high blood pressure because they go to the doctor and they get nervous and anxious around the doctor. And so then you take their blood pressure, and it's automatically going to be higher because of the state that they're in when they get their blood pressure taken. When it's
again, one of the things
so much judgment.
But also if you think about, let's go a minute into health here, right? Most people.
Oh, really quick. Do you want to do the camera thing one more time?
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
Better?
Okay, most people. Yep.
So most people, and I'm speaking in generalizations here, right? And probably for whoever's listening to this, you probably don't feel fit into most people, because most people listening to a health podcast may have an interest in health, right?
Especially when it's as long as it's going to be, because like a short time span.
And so let's talk about that most people. And if you look at a bell curve, and an easy way to actually look at this is obesity statistics, particularly in the United States, right? There's something like 2/3 of the United States or 3/4 is quote unquote overweight. Now,
Scary.
which that's done by BMI, and we all know the issues with BMI, but
Yeah.
in a overall population, it's usually pretty representative. But the average person does not think about their health as a priority, right? And so they're going through their life, and then something happens. And then there's usually a wake-up call, or maybe not, right? Like maybe they're so far gone that they just don't care. And so if you look at what we're doing in the nonprofit that I mentioned earlier, part of what we're doing is just really trying to think about an asteroid coming towards Earth, and that asteroid happens to represent obesity or metabolic syndrome, whatever it is, right? What we're really trying to do is just hit that asteroid enough so that it misses Earth. And we're not looking to convert the entire world to this conversation of health. But what we're looking to do is to take a significant number of people or a significant number of influential people and allow them to have the tools by which to live a healthier life. I will tell you right now, health is my number one priority. And health allows me to produce more energy in the world, allows me to be a better husband, allows me to be a better, whatever you call my career, just sort of entrepreneur, banker, etc. And so it's foundationally, that's what we're after here. And so when we look at just sort of where we are at a societal level, one of my bigger concerns is that, we are completely neglecting ourselves. We're all after some sort of experience on this pale blue dot, and we're completely neglecting ourselves, neglecting, what we can do for our own health. And so fundamentally, I do think there needs to be an attitude change that health is an investment rather than something that we take and just only focus on when we're sick. Because you invest time now, your time later will be better spent. This actually goes into this whole issue that I have with our whole deferred life plan we have, particularly in the United States, where everybody works hard until they're 65, and they're like, okay, then when I'm 65 and retire, I'm going to do something. And then you retire when you're 65, you end up doing nothing, your cognition declines, and you die in 10 years. And so that's not exactly my favorite way of living. But again, no judgment for those people that do that. I just think that there is a small subsection of the people that were willing to invest time and money in their health. Now they're going to get, I just see it in my own life, like they're going to get a lot out of their own life. And so that's a different approach.
Well, and that's so going off of everything you just said. About 2 years ago, when I was really trying to start Belmondo Lifestyle, which is like my kind of what I incorporate. And like what I do is I do like personal training, I do group coaching, I do nutrition, life coaching. So I really just call myself a health coach, right? Which I'm still learning and I'm still growing. But when I first created this 2 years ago, I was trying to figure out, it sounds really silly, but I was trying to figure out my bio on my Instagram. Like, how am I going to put this out there? My husband and I were sitting down, we were talking, and he said, well, what does this really encompass to you? And I said, like when I've talked with our gym owner, his big thing is talking about like, if you were to put a money or dollar sign on your health, right? So if you are someone that has quote unquote poor health, you could end up 10, 15 years spending millions of dollars in hospital bills and medicine and all that kind of stuff, just to be more sick at the end, right? So you're just spending all this money just to be sick and stay sick instead of and then versus if you put the money in now, right? So maybe you're spending more money in the moment than you would if you just stuck with the path of the hospitalization bills and all that stuff. You would not have, like, you would put the money in now. So the investment, you would invest in yourself now to now live the rest of your life potentially very healthy and be able to do more and not have to pay for all the extra things later on down the line. And so we talked about how in my bio, which is not there now, but in my bio, putting in investing in your life, right? So adding years onto your life. And so when you said the investment thing, I feel like that's so fitting because we are a society of now. We want it and we want it now, right? If I'm I want to feel better now. I don't want to put in that bullshit over the next 5 years to feel better in 5 years, right? I want to feel better now. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get stuck on, is the instant gratification of wanting to be better now or feel better now or not be sick now. And so they put Band-Aids on it, and they go to the doctor and they get medicine to put Band-Aids on it. And then over time, right, as we know, just from being able to see it, not just in our own lives, but with other people, is that tends to deteriorate you more as time goes on. But right now it feels.
Yeah.
And so it's being able to find people that are willing to put in the effort, because over time, because that's like, I had a client that for a while did keto, which if you do keto correctly, I think is very, it can help people in very beneficial ways, right? If you do it correctly. If you do it incorrectly, meaning like you go through a company that sends you like bars and sends you their food, and so then you don't learn anything. As soon as you get off keto, like maybe you lose a bunch of weight during it, but as soon as you get off of it, all of a sudden it comes back because you've learned nothing, because someone was feeding it to you the entire time. And so that's the same, very similar thing, right? So yes, maybe over time you're getting results, but what's going to happen is you weren't learning anything throughout the entire time that you were getting the results. So as soon as you think that you're done and you've gotten the result you want, put you right back to square one.
Yeah. It's let me tell a story, and maybe you won't listen to this, maybe you won't, but it's regarding my father. And so my dad is an example of what you just said. He's an incredible person, and among probably obviously because of my father, right? Like, he's probably the largest role model in my life for everything but health. And so I have this interesting genetic history with my father and my grandfather, etc. And in many ways, it's a motivation. But my dad has yo-yoed his entire life. And it's quite a dangerous pattern, actually, to yo-yo. And there's a lot of people that publish on this. But he will go through a period where he'll lose a ton of weight, and then he'll stop, and exactly what you just described, right? And so why not take a different approach? And what you just said is beautiful. And we kind of use the term empowered responsibility to tell people this. But empowered responsibility is essentially this. We're going to give you the tools that you need to succeed, right? And we do this with Troscriptions. We provide a ton of education there. And we're going to give you the tools that you need to succeed. We're going to give you the tools that will get you out of those ruts. We call them 1 cent solutions, right? So the 1 cent solution for stress, Trocalm. 1 cent solution for focus, blue canopy, right? And so we give you those tools. But we also want to provide you along that journey with that education, that empowered responsibility. So, but we can't do it for you. Like, unfortunately, this isn't Neo in the Matrix, right? Like, there isn't a computer download, and you can all of a sudden say, I learned Kung Fu. By the way, the closest thing I've found to that is ketamine, but that's probably another topic. Anyway, so you don't have that just download. So there is some responsibility, or empowered responsibility, by which you can learn these things while actually implementing them. And so I think that's what you probably did in your health journey. It's certainly what I did. And I know a lot of people out there, at least I have certain perspective on our customers value those kind of conversations.
Well, that's one thing that my clients know about me, and that our members know about me. One thing I consistently say about myself, and my husband hears it all the time, is that I'm a human experiment.
Yep.
So I am not
human guinea pig.
Yes, like I will do I do my research to know, obviously, like if I'm going to do something that's going to really be harmful to me. But if there's something that will either help me or do nothing, then I'm like, let me try it.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know that over time, not only am I learning for myself, but now I'm learning for other clients and other people that are going through similar things as me. Because that's really how I see. Because so earlier, kind of bring it back around, you're talking about how people, maybe was it you or was it someone else? We'll find out. That people tend to have to go through something to make a change, right?
Yep.
And that's one thing that I'm trying to decipher in my own life as well with other people, right? Because I get frustrated because I see in myself and others that there's no will to change until something happens where you feel like there's a will to change, right?
Yeah. And so
Which,
how do you accelerate that?
yeah, exactly. How do you accelerate it? And that's actually that now is my bio on my Instagram. It's that quote of like, here to help you when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change. Right. So now
Oh,
I'm actually
beautiful.
to change because the pain is so great in the moment.
And have you ever, so this is just interesting. It's come top of mind right now. And so, and again, keep in mind my bias here, right? In terms of human behavior, I love data, and data, going back to what I said earlier, data is like an orgasm, right? And so what I've found in terms of at least the population that I work with is that a reasonable frequency of testing is not only a great way to avoid some of these potentially catastrophic situations, but also a way to bring to your awareness what's going on underneath the hood. Because in all fairness, a lot of people that are listening to this cannot tell what is going on in their ATP production or their Krebs cycle, right? Certainly I don't sit here and think, and I'm not able to feel through, okay, cell number 1233 has an issue with ATP production, but I can do a blood spot test and it can tell me exactly what I need. And so having that data with some degree of frequency, and this is why devices like the Oura Ring, the Whoop, etc., choose one, use it. It allows you to witness, putting a number to something allows you to quantify it. I have this sort of 3-stage model for health, but this is a way to bring awareness to what you're doing and to what is actually serving you in your life. And blood spot metabolomic testing is certainly a way to do it as well. And that allows you to also put a filter on this health world, because this health world is full of a lot of shit. And so why not just get a way to know what's good for you based on your own data?
Yeah. And I think too, that's a very important topic that could definitely be spread, because I think in general, when you go to a normal doctor, and by the way, that's Dr. Ed and I had a great conversation yesterday, because I have no issue with westernized medicine except for when it's overused for the things that don't need to be used for, right? Like if you have something detrimental happening right now, westernized medicine is what you want to use, because they're going to be able to help you in the moment. Oh gosh, and I just forgot my train of thought. But when you go and get like tested for deficiencies, right? They have it on such a broad spectrum that when they give you your results back, they're like, oh yeah, everything looks great. Even though technically for myself, my vitamin D is actually very low for what I need, right?
Yeah.
So a more specified testing allows you to understand like, what does my body need versus what someone else's body needs. So like, just because on their spectrum it says, oh, everything is in line, is everything really in line for what my body needs? And I think that's really important.
And what's interesting about this whole thing is that I love definitions. I love first principles, right? And so if you start with health, so health is simply A plus B plus C, and I didn't come up with this, Ted came up with this, right? And maybe Ed mentioned it yesterday, but it's, absence of disease, balance of anabolism and catabolism, which is simply anabolic and catabolic processes in the body, and then life cycle of the organism. And so when we look at the life cycle of the organism, what I love about our framework in health optimization medicine and practice is that reference ranges, as you hinted on, are quite flawed. It's in certain cases, if you go, it used to be the case that like thyroid stimulating hormone, the reference range was created for people from the ages of 9 to like 70 something, and it included both genders. And you're then taking an average, a bell curve, and saying, okay, if you're within, this range, you're okay. Well, what if we be a little bit more specific and say, why don't we bring you back to the levels that you're supposed to be at when you're 21 to 30? So you'd think that is, and it is actually more biologically advantageous in many ways. And so what we've actually sought to do in health optimization medicine and practice is to actually quantify what is health, or actually qualify what is health, and then quantify it as well.
So I understand like the quantify. What do you mean by the qualify?
Well, okay. Quantify and quantification implies numbers. Qualification.
Yeah.
If I were to poll probably 12 people, let's say I go walk outside, pick my neighbors and get 12 people and ask them, what is health? There's a reasonable chance that several of them are going to say, well, it's when you're not sick. That's probably
Yeah.
the thing you'll probably get the majority of, but most people don't have a unified definition of health. And
Yeah.
so a qualified definition. So what we're trying to do here is just put a definition out there that everybody can use and say like, okay, this is actually what health is. And so it's health
Okay.
is just A plus B plus C. It's simple algebra, or we just make it look like simple algebra. It's actually quite a lot of work underneath, but you know, it's all about allowing people to speak from first principles. Like, okay, we're all have a uniform definition now. Okay, if we all have that uniform definition, let's move forward from there.
Okay, that makes sense. I like how you do. You say A plus B plus C. Sounds simple, but have you ever actually tried to do algebra? It starts off looking simple, and then all of a sudden you're 20 lines down until you finally find your answer.
Yeah, exactly. Quadratic equations are the bane of my existence now.
Oh
I'm
my
joking.
gosh. No. Do you still use that stuff?
On occasion, yeah. So what I would say is that, remember, going back to full circle here on the thread, like I'm a very curious person.
Yeah.
What's interesting about my life is I grew up being told that calculus isn't useful. And then I went into finance where if you look at how an option is a contract to buy something at a future price, right?
Yeah.
Options are priced largely based on calculus. And so there is some calculus in there that I found useful. But now I'm also like, I have a book over here called The Computational Beauty of Nature. And you look at the patterns that repeat themselves from nature to ourselves. A lot of those are mathematical. You can kind of see things like the golden ratio, for instance. That's a famous one. You can see pi and in various situations. And so I've become a lot more interested in math. Do I say I'm using it? Yeah, I mean, I'm using it to a certain extent when I'm looking at data sets, but I'm not necessarily using Napier-Stokes equations every day.
Yeah. Wait, you said the golden what?
Golden ratio. So
What's the
that
golden
is
ratio?
1.6. You kind of hear it expressed as phi. And so it's the spiral. And so it kind of loops out. And it's traditionally 1.618 ...
Okay. So I've heard of phi, oddly enough. I've not heard of the golden ratio.
There you go. Usually people have heard about it the other way. So
yeah,
it's a very, I mean, look, fractals are all over the place. It's a fascinating science. I'm just, again, this is one of those things. Remember earlier how I kind of gradually connected the thread between finance and health? I'm also interested in what the influence of nature has on all of those different subjects.
Like nature as of now, or like historically nature?
All of the above, right? Because it's just, so if we take an evolutionary perspective, there's certain things that allowed us to survive and replicate in particular, right? Like you have an evolutionary drive to have children, all of us do. And some of us choose to go against that evolutionary drive. We have, and those are bioevolutionary programs. We have an evolutionary drive to be in groups. Some of us choose to go against those drives because of whatever reason, right? That's a tribal nature of us. We have biological, you have social cultural programs that can be built around things like religion, around your family growing up, etc. And so being aware of those programs has been one of the more powerful things that has ever come in my life. And just sort of being aware of what, again, it goes back to that interest in human behavior, right? You know, the particular push to have children, the particular push to maybe the particular way that people look at the world maybe have a heavily influenced or have been heavily influenced by the religion they had growing up. Religion is one of two things you don't talk about on the first date. So, you know, Madison, you tell me if you want to go there. I'm happy to talk about it, but it's just, you know, I know this is our first time recording something, so I don't necessarily have to go into it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm the kind of person that likes to talk about politics and religion on the first date.
Well, we can go. We can go. There you go. I can go. I can dance that dance. So you tell me where we go next.
Well, Well, gosh, let's talk about that then. So I had
Okay.
a question, but now I'm kind of curious about this one.
Okay.
So let's talk about the religion aspect. So how do you?
Sure. Um, so again, let's kind of lay the framework here. I'm a very, very curious person. So I was born and baptized into the Roman Catholic religion. And so I'll speak from that standpoint because that will probably piss the least number of people off. But let's so I grew
Hey,
up.
I'll put it this way. The reason why I like talking about religion and politics is because I like, first off, learning from someone else's point of view, right?
Mhm.
But if it pisses someone off, that means that you have hit something that they have not been curious about enough,
Exactly. And
right? And so
I
that's,
completely agree with you.
so you can piss off as many people as you want, because that just means that they're in an uncomfortable position for themselves. That's not because you put them there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so let's take again, let's go through that thread again in
Yep.
terms of how this connects to the human and human behavior. So I was born in and baptized into Roman Catholic religion. Part of one of the staples within the Roman Catholic religion is something called original sin, meaning that you're born with sin. And despite having done nothing in your life, like you come out of the womb, you're sin. There's and it's due to this story around Adam and Eve and having eaten from the apple tree, uh, growing up, and basically being banished from the Garden of Eden. Everybody knows the Adam and Eve story,
Yeah.
but the one of the and I'm no longer a practicing Roman Catholic. I would highly doubt you can even qualify me as Catholic anymore. But one of the aspects of Catholicism is this continued theme of fear. And so it's a, whether it starts with original sin, it's magnified by telling you that there's certain aspects of the Ten Commandments, right? That like you have to go to church every Sunday, you have to love thy neighbor, you have to do all of these other things, and then you amplify it more with things like confession and confessing your sins to a priest, and you continue to live in this fear of this entity called God, right? And you can see that play out in certain people and how they act in society. They continually act out of fear and sort of
Yes.
a lack of understanding who they are, but are more afraid of somebody finding out who they are, or somebody a fear of doing something wrong. Now,
Yes.
again, I have nothing against religion. It works for some people, but I spent a lot of time investigating not only Catholicism, but also areas like Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. I've read from the Vedas, I've read from the Upanishads, I've read a lot of stuff in Buddhism, I've read things in pre-Buddhist Bon, and there's a whole lot that you can learn from those sacred texts across those different religions. But you can also then take that and observe it in other people's programs. And so as you're meeting with people, and this is actually helpful in sort of developing compassion for other people too, is that you end up talking, you view what they say, and sometimes what they say can be so obtuse or so annoying, but then you understand that it might just be a part of what they grew up with, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, in particular with Roman Catholic religion, you can actually observe people speaking with fear, and you understand that, hey, okay, this person grew up Catholic. Maybe that was actually instilled with them when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And so that's my little diatribe on religion. I can certainly go deeper and deeper.
Well, and this is why I like talking about this stuff, because I think it's very interesting when you start pulling apart religion and then spirituality, right? And I know that some people, spirituality is like lack of religion. I honestly think it's the more beautiful side of it, and the sake that you're taking away someone who's telling you what to do, and you're taking away the fear, and you're finding the beauty in what you believe, right? So I was born and raised Christian, right? So I believe in Jesus, and I still do believe in God and believe in Jesus. But I also believe that if, like when they say they plant the fear of God in you, right? I don't want to, and this is an opinion, right? I don't want to fear the God that I love and that created me.
Yeah.
I want to have love, because when I have love, I live a life full of love versus a life full of fear. Right. And that to me is how I perceive it, in a sake of, if I have someone that is telling me all these things, I have to follow all these commandments, and I can't be sinning, and I can't do this, but even though I can't do these things, I'm still a sinner no matter what. Like, even if I try my best to be this person, I'm still a sinner. But then that's, the idea of Jesus is, like, Jesus died for your sins, so even when you sin, you're saved, right? But I still think that it's putting fear in you, so that you're living a life of fear versus the life of love and connection. Then that's why, to me, it's fun talking about this, because then you can really see the people that do live in more of the fear-based religion versus, and I talked with Dr. Ed about this yesterday. I finished a book called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Have you ever heard of that book?
I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of Napoleon Hill's work, Think and Grow Rich, and he wrote a couple of other books too. I love his work. I particularly admire Andrew Carnegie, which is a lot of what Think and Grow Rich is based on. So
yeah, I like Carnegie. But so the book is basically based around, he had a conversation with the devil, and you can kind of take it however you want. You can have it where, did he actually have a conversation with the devil? Was it just a conversation with the subconscious, and this is what he came up with as the devil? Like, it's a very interesting concept. But basically, he sits down and has an interview asking the devil all these questions. The devil talks about how his 3 main workers in the world that work for him to bring people, because he says 98% of the people are his, right? So only 2 out of every 100 people are what you would call like God people, like people that would be going to God when they die, which he talks about, like negative energy versus positive energy. Devil's negative, God is the positive. But he says that his 3 main workers are parents, teachers, and religious leaders. Because parents, teachers, and religious leaders take away your ability to think for yourself. That's like his number one. That's what brings people to him, is the ability to not think for yourself. So people that tend to just go along with whatever people tell them to do. And so that really, I mean, obviously it's to me, it's a fictional book, but it brings to light the very obvious of today's world, where people do not think for themselves.
And let's jump on this, Madison, because I think you hit at a very interesting point. And so I know some of the cooler kids are calling this sense making, right? But let's just kind of keep it a little bit simple. And so the ability to think, develop, form your own opinion, to me, is at danger, at risk. And what I look at right now when it comes to society is this mass polarization of populism, right? And that's a dangerous situation to be in. So now we're intertwining politics with what you just said, right? But politics is also a reflection, similar to markets, as to human behavior, right? And so when we're looking at human behavior and human behavior at a societal level, how you vote is also a reflection of that behavior, right? And so we can now see that populism is, of course, on the rise. And then coming in, we're going to bring our entire conversation full circle here, that feedback loop from social media, right? Because if you look at social media's, and again, I don't really have anything against social media. I use social media for our business. I use social media for my own business. It
works great when you use it right.
Exactly. But what is social media designed to do fundamentally? It's designed to bring you into a place, a website or an app or whatever it is, and have you stay there as long as possible. And what is the easiest way to keep you in a place as long as possible and serve you as many ads as you want, is to keep serving you the same stuff that you like to see. And so I keep serving you the same stuff that you like to see. Your behavior, your beliefs are going to get reinforced, right? And you're not challenging those. And so if you're not challenging those, there's an inherent danger, because what you believe then becomes more and more cemented. What you believe you think is true, because now you've seen 100 YouTube videos on it. And so of course the rest of the world thinks the same way and I must be fucking correct, right?
Yes.
But you haven't seen one taking the opposite point of view, because it's not serving. And again, like, proponent of capitalism, it's a great system when used properly, but it's not serving you to learn the other side of the argument, right?
Yeah.
And so what we have now is this great divide between numerous, I mean, in the US it's political parties, also race, but it's something that it continues to get reinforced by the very instruments that we use to entertain ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So if anything, I mean, look, I know we're supposed to talk about health here, but like, if anything, the one thing I would love for people to take away here is just like, listen to the other side and try and understand, even if you don't agree with them, listen to the other side, get the facts that you can from the other side to verify those facts. It does take more work. And so to a certain extent, you have to get up your ass. You probably need a little bit of dopamine to do it. And so you can take L-Dopa or mecanoprurins for that, or go work out. But also it will help. I don't know how to fix that crisis, right? And I'm not saying I can't, but if people are able to sit down at a dinner table and have a conversation, that's at least one way to do it. But if they're able to at least watch a YouTube video on the other side, hopefully that opens your mind. It also makes you a more effective arguer, because like, have you ever had a conversation with somebody who's incredibly polarized, right? And how do they react when you challenge their position? It's actually fun for me to
anger.
do. Yeah, exactly. So it's like prodding a
triggering,
cattle, right? It's like, okay, and you kind of observe, again, going back to programming, what you can do here. And so you're basically taking that hot cattle prod and you're like, okay, I want to hit this button now. Okay, holy shit, everything's popped out. But if you speak to somebody who at least, first off, is willing to listen, but also has at least done the time of understanding viewpoints from every side, there's a little bit more relaxed of a conversation. You may argue still, but that argument may be probably more balanced. Yeah.
And that's, so like what you're saying is, it's beautiful in a way, because I think that's some stuff that needs to happen, because that's, God, where do you even start with this one? I'll just start from the basics. So
sure.
I think, because you were talking about you don't know how to change it. So one way that I've actually, because I used to be that person. I'd be the person you could poke and I would just blow up. And I still kind of do it sometimes. My husband has a really fun time with me, because sometimes I'll do the same thing, where he'll be able to poke me and then it'll drive me nuts. And he knows which buttons to push to get me there. But that was me as a person for a very long time, right? So I would be on the defense. So I would get very offended by people that would question the way that I thought. And the way that I learned to get out of it was to start, your favorite thing, because you're talking about how it doesn't really relate with health. I think this relates with health 100%, right? Like this is health. If you can challenge the way that you think, because that Dr. Ed and I talked about dementia yesterday, and one of the things that we talked about was the fact that when you get to a certain age, you stop challenging yourself with all of your senses, right? And so if you're able to challenge yourself and learn and be able to understand someone else's side, that's going to help you be a better person and a healthier person. But like the way that I have people to do this, right? So when I've worked with clients, I call it the ego.
Yeah.
So if someone challenges you on something, it's your ego. And you take it in offensive, right? So I ask people to feel when you get challenged in some way, shape, or form, where do you feel it? So like for me, my ego is right here in my chest. So I can feel myself. It's like almost this ball that starts to come up, right? Where I can feel this like a fist trying to come out of my mouth. And I get really, when I start taking offense to things, or if I start getting riled up about something. And so that's
Eastern
my first
philosophy,
step.
They would say it's the power chakra. So
there you go. I like that. But so I always have, like when I've worked with clients, that's my first step is, where do you feel it? Allow yourself to speak whatever you're going to speak. If you want to get offended for something, get offended for something. But the first step is, can you feel where it comes from? Right? Because then now you're aware oh, like that's a different side of me. Because this is a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation that we can have, is talking about ego, because I love this conversation.
Yeah.
But then the second step is, can you take 3 deep breaths before you respond? So when you feel it coming, now can you breathe before you respond, right? Because usually what that does is it allows someone to realize that it's not them that's about to speak, it's their ego, whether they know it yet or not. Because I think another thing that people don't tend to realize is, like, your ego is separate from you, right? So like, I used to have anxiety attacks pretty consistently because I thought anxiety was me, until I realized that my anxiety is separate from me. It's a separate being, right? So like, the person that I am, I can have anxiety, I can have anger, I can have all these different, like, more negative type of emotions where it tends to lead. And one of them is being, like, offended, right? Or being challenged. So it's understanding that that is not you, that's a separation from you. And when you can get to the point where you can separate it, now when I have a conversation with you and you say something that challenges me, I can learn to be curious and ask questions about why you think that, versus having my ego fire up. So now my ego and I have a better relationship where I can understand why it feels that way. But now I can ask you a question versus defend what I'm trying to say. And then it leads into a better conversation. And I think that's where people have the disconnect, is they don't understand that they don't have to react that way. They think they do, but they don't have to. It's a separate part of them that's reacting versus being curious about whatever it is. So anyways.
And look, I think it's a great point. And look, we do know now the ego is a part of your brain. It's largely hosted in a part of your brain called the default mode network, right? And so the default mode network is let me try, if I get this wrong, somebody don't
say default mode network.
Default mode network.
Ooh, okay. I like this.
Default mode network is a part of your brain, largely around your parietal lobes, your medial prefrontal cortex, and gosh, what's the last one? Anyway, so the default mode network is largely where we believe the ego to be, and that is also your center for forward thinking. Your center for forward thinking, think of that as also anxiety, right? It's your center for ruminating thoughts. It's your center for a lot of what we know to be ego, right? And what we also know is that your thoughts are not necessarily you, right? At the end of the day, your thoughts are largely produced by your brain operations. And so if you think about your brain as a data gathering machine, and it's constantly gathering data points throughout the day. And this is also, by the way, where it helps to control your environment or feed your brain good things, because these thoughts are manifested as a result of this assimilation of data points. And so the thoughts are just simply depolarizations, or sort of flashings in and out in your brain. And, those aren't you. And so if you think about it in context then, so if your thoughts aren't you, and you have this machine in your brain that's largely designed to forward think, which had a purpose within evolution, right? Think about it.
Yes.
If you are a soon switched from primate to human on a savanna trying to survive, and Jesus Christ, there is a fucking tiger chasing after you, it's helpful to be forward thinking and making sure that you're avoiding the place where tigers go or lions go. And I was actually just in South Africa yesterday, and I saw a leopard, and you don't want to be in the path of a leopard, right? That's just not a good idea. And I saw a lion chase an impala, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But you don't want to be in the path of a lion. And so it has a use, but now, in today's age, we're ruminating thoughts and future thinking about emails. And so an email is not going to eat you. And so just remember, having that perspective has been an incredible gift for me. But I think some of the things that you outlined there are key bullet points for people. First off, meditation helps with that pause and creating that second to react before, or second to, I guess, pause before you react. And it's probably the number one thing that I've ever done is learning how to meditate. And then number two, that biting your lip, or I think you said something about holding your tongue or something like this, or pausing for 3 seconds. is a great way to kind of gather your thoughts, and also, again, where you feel it, there's a heat component sometimes, and
Yep.
that can be interesting to observe as well.
Well, and that was another one of my clients. I really liked how he explained to me, like, because he felt it almost in his hands, like it would go from his hands into his face, right? And it was the same, like he felt heat and he would shake when he would feel that. But those are things that until he became aware of it, he didn't know that he did. And so that's like, I think awareness of self is one of the most important things that people tend to not have.
Yeah.
If you ask someone about themselves, they will, like you said, they'll tell you about their job. They'll tell you about physical things they've done in their life.
Yeah.
But if you ask them about things that happen inward, like how do you think and feel about it? Like I'll ask people that come into our gyms, what are the thoughts that you give yourself day to day, like your average type of thought? And they have no idea because they've never sat down to think about, what do I think about in my own mind? Which obviously, like when you talk,
mine's fucking crazy, Madison. Do you want me to give you insight into mine? No,
oh my gosh, but it's so much fun to, I mean, just like you were talking about, right? Like when you work with people for an extended period of time, you start to be able to see the patterns that happen. So when someone comes in to our gym and you can look at them, you can talk to them for 5 minutes and understand exactly the pattern of thought that they have, because you know that pattern of thought. But when you ask them what their thoughts are, like what they think about themselves is a very popular one that we ask. Like, what are thoughts that you give to yourself? I don't know. Right? They're like, well, I like, do you think, or another question that we'll ask is like, what do you tend to think, negative thoughts or positive thoughts towards yourself? Like, well, I think it's pretty positive. And you talk to them for 5 minutes, you're like, it's not. Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to go home during the week and you say, I just want you to be aware. Because as soon as you tell someone to be aware of something, I don't know, and maybe you know the science behind this, but when you tell someone to be aware of something, they're able to think about those things more. Right? Yeah. Even through an extended period of time.
It's like when you buy a white BMW, right? Not that I've ever bought a white BMW. All of a sudden you start to observe that there's white BMWs all over
everywhere. Yes.
or you tell somebody, what's actually a fun trick is like you tell somebody not to think of something. And, then they're able to think. So it's like, all right, Madison, I want you to think, whatever you do, Madison, right now, do not think of a pink elephant.
You know how many times this week I'm going to think about a pink elephant? Because
of course, you can call this the pink elephant episode.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's.
But that's what I've noticed with people, and then too, like we talk about at our gym, because we're big with nutrition too, right? Like I'm a nutritionist. That's one of the things that I do, is you ask people like, what are your hunger cues? Like, do you know when you're hungry and when you're full?
Mm-hmm.
No. How many people have no idea when they're hungry and when they're full? Because it's usually like they stress eat, or they eat when they're bored, or they eat on a time, right? So like I always eat breakfast here and lunch here and dinner here. But are you ever hungry when you eat? Well, I don't know. Like I never really pay attention to that. I don't know if.
And having people go through like an initial, one of my onboarding tricks for people particularly who have some sort of perceived weight issue, to go through a longer period of fasting. And obviously, there has to be some sort of supervision with that. But for people who particularly are overweight or haven't reconnected with food in a while, having a longer period of fast before you start, like as you start working with them, allows them to really get to that feeling of hunger again. So, a 1 to 3 day fast is, for the population I work with, is generally pretty safe, but for other populations, maybe not so. And again, you need medical supervision there, but it helps you reconnect with that feeling of hunger again.
Yes. And I'm not quite to the point where I feel like I can safely do that, because if something was to happen, I don't have, obviously.
Of course. And it's something that I only use in a handful of people, and it's usually in conjunction working with a doctor, right? So I have somebody that's supervising it.
But I do think it's powerful, even doing, because I've had clients that I'll have them do intermittent fasting, just so they can understand, just like you said, right? Because maybe they don't get to the point where they can really connect back with the hunger, but then they start to feel it again. Because if you're someone that doesn't ever feel hungry because you never pay attention to your hunger cues, and you fast for 12 to 16 hours, all of a sudden your stomach is like, what the heck? Why are you not feeding me?
Yeah, exactly.
And so then it starts to get hungry, and you're like, oh, this makes sense. Because like we'll tell people, if you're trying to lose weight, a basic thing is like eat until you're 80% full. If you're trying to gain
Yeah.
weight, eat until you're 110% full. Well, then someone's like, well, I don't even know when I'm hungry or full. It's like, well, this
Yeah.
is a different conversation. Now we have to figure out, when are you hungry, and are you able to eat until you're only 80% full versus eating until you're so stuffed and assuming that that's when you're supposed to eat, right? It's like the whole idea of eating what's on your plate. So instead of having a big plate, you have a smaller plate. So now
Yeah.
you're only challenging yourself to eat what's on this plate.
And there's a whole class of drugs coming out now called GLP-1 receptor agonists, which this is again going down another wormhole, but those drugs can help. I've taken one off label by myself, full risk on the N of one, right? And I don't really need to lose weight, but I was trying it because I have interest in these things. And it's just interesting to see how quickly you can rebuild your relationship with hunger, and particularly leptin, the hormone that allows you to feel full. And so it's like we're at this awesome precipice where if you're willing to, like, modern medicine can be great for certain things. And like, frankly, if you had some sort of gunshot or stab wound, like, go to the hospital. That's great.
Yeah.
If you like, I'm not against prescription drugs at all. They can be used effectively. Like, opiates have a particular use for a period of time, and they can be useful. Abused, they may not be. And so just removing that bias, like, you can also use a GLP-1 receptor agonist to help rebuild that hunger, or you can use fasting. And so it's a fascinating topic. Madison, I do apologize. I have to go in a couple of minutes, but this has been an amazing conversation.
Well, and we can just close it up now, because I know,
Okay.
it's been an hour and a half. It's fine. I think we have enough here to.
Well, we can always jump back on the line. This
with.
is such a wide-ranging conversation, so we can always come back and do round two whenever you want.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, that's a big thing for me, is the fact that, like, because I've had, like, even Richard was saying to keep him on track, and it's like there is no track. I mean, there's getting us back to conversation, but there's no track, and that's my favorite part of doing this, is you can cover whatever the heck you want to cover in the conversation that we have, versus just being so specific on one thing. So anyways.
And it's a beautiful thing, right? And I love what you're doing. Want to continue supporting it, so let me know how I can be helpful.
Thank you, Boomer. I really appreciate it. All right. Well, then I will let you off. Thank you so much for doing this and talking with me. This will not be the last time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Madison.
Of course. Thank you, Boomer. Have a great day.
See you. You too. Bye.
Bye.